Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I like to run my sessions fairly informally, so even though we're a fairly large crowd, if you have questions, I'll be happy to entertain them as we go through this presentation, and hopefully we'll be able to answer. If we get too specific in an area, I may ask to talk to you one-on-one, because I do have a good amount of material I want to cover that I think is germane to all of us. As Ellen said, my name is Jim Griggy. I work with the Small Business Development Center. We are located in the Akron Global Business Accelerator, which is downtown Akron in Canal Place. And we offer free business consulting services to small businesses. And those would be small businesses by the SBA definition of a small business, which is anything under 500 employees. So it takes in quite a range. And we do work with a lot of people that just have one or two people in the business. So don't think you're too small, don't think you're too large. We're happy to help you any way we can. Tonight's topic is business survival skills. It's no secret that right now is a rough economy for small businesses. And a number of business people, both formally and informally, have asked if there's any insight that we can share as to how to work with this kind of economy. I'm going to present a lot of ideas to you. Some of them will fit your business or your needs. Others may not be relevant at all to what you do. Hopefully, it's my goal that you all walk away with 2 or 3 ideas that may be workable for you. As we all know, small business runs the gamut from small retail to business sales to manufacturing to technology, and so there's no one solution for everybody. But I want to cover a lot of ideas I think will work. In a challenging economy, especially if you feel challenged as a business owner or as a business manager, the very first thing you need to do is take a realistic assessment of your business. You need to review your most recent financial statements. And you need to make sure that you continue to receive monthly financial statements. How many of you own or operate a small business in here? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you actually get financial statements on a monthly basis, either out of QuickBooks or some software, or by an accountant or a bookkeeping service? Does everyone get? Okay. It's very important in uncertain economic times that you watch financial statements closely. As I said, I've done a lot of business counseling, and one of the things I find is that people come to us in dire straits. And when I look at the financial statements, if they knew what they were looking at, if they had been paying attention and understood the financial statements that were in front of them, they could have headed off a problem before it got to such a great scale. So make sure you understand your financials. If you don't, talk to the person that prepares them. If they're not communicating in English with you, feel free to call us and make an appointment to see me or one of my colleagues. We'll be glad to sit down and help you work through your financial statements and at least understand what they're telling you. One of the things that we offer as the Small Business Development Center on a quarterly basis is a class called Numbers Demystified for businesses that have been in business for a year or more. And basically it's a 2.5-hour workshop on how to look at financial statements, how to understand what your numbers are telling you. So all of those, there are lots of avenues to understand the financials, but in an economic time where things are not all cushy and cash is not flowing as freely as we all would like, you got to keep your eye on the financials. The next thing you have to do, all businesses have some revenue function, some sales function. If you're going to plan to weather a storm, you need to pull the sales force. You need the sales force to give you some realistic projections on the sales that they're anticipating over the next year. You know, what are we anticipating in the month, the quarter, the year? Now, business owners, you have to be smart in this. You know that if you beat a salesman up too hard, he's going to tell you what you want to hear. Right? Don't beat your people up. Give them the opportunity to be honest with you. Because finding out at the end of the quarter that the salesman told you what you wanted to hear and has no ability to deliver doesn't help you manage the cash issue, does it? You need to get realistic numbers, and the way to get those realistic numbers is to make sure that the people aren't in peril of their life or their job for telling you what they think is real. And then on a regular basis, probably a weekly basis, if you're not chief cook and bottle washer, if you don't do your own payables and manage your own accounting for your business, you need to look over all cash outflows. Now, the payables aging is only part of that picture. Paying your vendors is only one part of how you use cash, right? Some of you have bank loans or lines of credit that need to be retired or reduced. And those kinds of things don't show up on the accounts payable sheet, or at least they shouldn't. We all have payrolls to meet, and those usually don't show up on the AP aging. So be aware of all the major cash outflows. And one thing that actually would make some sense even is to just do a single column in sequential order of cash outflows and inflows that you know about, and track your cash position in a very simple way. Do it in a simple Excel spreadsheet. We're really going to talk about three things tonight: cash management, sales and marketing, and customer relations management. So as we get into cash management, one of the things that people struggle with is when they have significantly more in cash outflows than they have cash to cover. And I think if every business person in this room is honest with themselves, at some point during your business life, you've hit that point where there's more going out than is in the checking account, more going out than you have in loose cash to cover. How do we prioritize that? What's the smart way to handle that? Well, for a couple reasons, the most important thing is that you cover the payroll. There are a lot of legal reasons why you'd want to do that, and nothing gives you worse morale and worse word-of-mouth publicity than when you miss a payroll or when you defer a payroll. Your employees will gripe to everyone they talk to. They'll tell their friends when they're having a beer at night. They'll tell the people that they see at church. And the whole world will start to get the impression that your business is in financial trouble. And that impression can create a reality that's hard to fight. So always, 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 your top priority is to meet your payroll, even if you as the business owner don't take a paycheck in order to do that. Meet your payroll. And pay attention, if you pay semi-monthly, then make sure a week before the payroll is to be paid that your cash is covered. If you discover on Thursday night that Friday's payroll is not likely to be met, you don't have a lot of time to take corrective action. So pay particularly close attention to make sure that you've got cash to cover that. Next in your order of priorities is tax liabilities. Good old Uncle Sam is not real forgiving. And if the U.S. government or the state government notices that you are behind in paying your tax payments, they can do things like freeze all of your accounts until they figure out what's going on. They can impose big penalties, all of which puts you in a deeper hole and a tighter situation than you're already in. So, number 2 on your order of priorities is getting your tax liabilities paid. Of course, when we're in financial difficulty, we like to look at our bankers for some assistance, don't we? One of the keys to getting assistance from the bank is to make sure that you're paying your obligations to the bank on a timely basis. If you're not doing that and you do need some compassion from your banker, you're not going to find much. So, order of priority, payroll first, tax liability second, bank loans and lines third. Then your critical supply lines. There are certain things that you receive from your vendors that if they stop providing those goods or services to you, you would be out of business. Right? Every business has a critical supply line. Whether it's a service or a good, you need to do your best to make sure that you're keeping reasonably current with your suppliers of those critical items so that you can continue to carry on business. And finally, all of you should have 1 or 2 vendors that you keep pristine. That is to say, if their terms with you are net 30, they always receive payment on day 29. And these are vendors that you do a good bit of business with. Because at some point in time, you may need a credit reference. Another vendor is a credit reference. Usually if you're applying for something, a credit application with a new vendor, or talking to a bank about a loan or other kinds of financial activity, you will be asked for 2 or 3 vendor credit references. Have 2 or 3 people out there that can honestly say that you're doing a good job, that you're keeping up with your bills, that they're happy with you, that you do a good volume of business with them. And then you have, of course, the other bills, which you kind of have to fill in as you can. I want to talk a bit about lines of credit. Are you using them properly? A commercial line of credit is designed to smooth out your cash flows. That is to say, let's take an example of a machine shop. A machine shop gets an order from one of its clients. They need 100 widgets. In order for the machine shop to build those 100 widgets, he needs 2,000 feet of steel sheeting. Right now, in his checking account, he doesn't have the cash to cover 2,000 feet of steel sheeting. So that's the appropriate use of the credit line, to go out and buy that steel sheeting he needs to make the product. And the promise he should be making to himself, or she should be making to herself, is that when payment is received for that order from that client, the business goes back and reduces the line of credit because they've received payment on that order. A line of credit is an instrument that is designed for no other reason than to smooth out cash flows. If you've used it for other things, I know lots of businesses have used lines of credit to buy assets, to extend operating capital, all sorts of emergencies. If that amount of money is not going down on a regular basis, banks expect you to zero your line of credit once a year. They will forgive you. They'll give you a little latitude and a little slack in there, but they really expect, if you're using the instrument properly, that the line of credit goes to zero, no outstanding balance or no significant outstanding balance, once a year at least. So if you're using it as spare cash and that balance isn't going down, you might want to sit down with your banker and say, I need a line of credit, but let's term this out and see how you can work out terming out, or turning the balance into a fixed balance with a 3 to 5 year payment plan. Credit cards. This is your most expensive source of funds. As we all know, sometimes it's easy to whip out the credit card when there's no other option. But in the past couple of months, I've talked to several businesses with serious credit card debt. I've talked to one business that has credit card debt approaching $200,000 at 23% interest. That's a hole. That's a hard one to get out of. All the money is going to pay part of the interest. The principal is not coming down. So, what's the wise use for your business credit cards? Business credit cards should be used for employee travel and entertainment. They should be used in place of cash advances to employees for travel and entertainment or other small purchases. They are also appropriate in place of petty cash. Many CPAs have now taken the stand that petty cash is really not something that makes sense in a business. It's just an accounting nightmare over a small amount of money. And so many CPAs will give you the advice that instead of keeping $100 or $200 in petty cash, you keep those with legitimate uses for petty cash. You give them a credit card to use with a low limit so they can buy this or that small supply or odds or ends that they need around the office, or go to the post office and buy postage or stamps or whatever those small expenses are. Keep in mind, they are the most expensive source of business funds. So you shouldn't use them to buy capital equipment or assets unless it's truly an emergency. You're all business people, and you all need to make good business decisions. There may be a time when you have to bend the rule, but do so carefully and sparingly. Because wouldn't you much rather pay 7% on the money that's outstanding than 23%? You don't use your credit cards as a credit line like you don't use them to smooth out the cash flow. You don't use them to buy assets. You also need, in tough economic times, to watch travel and entertainment. We all agree to that, but sometimes we don't. We give it a nod, but we don't really do it. We're too busy to sit down and pay attention to what's happening. And this can be a big money drain, a big leak. So first of all, have travel and entertainment policies for those people that are allowed to entertain or travel on behalf of the company. Have a written policy and then make sure everyone understands it. You may even be wise to include that in your employee handbook and make sure that all of your employees sign off on that. One of the policies that you should implement if you're giving someone a credit card for travel and entertainment is that it is not for their personal expenses. It's not for a personal advance. And part of what should be in that agreement to use that credit card should be that the employee promises not to use it for their personal expenses. Now, there's always a trade-off. Company image versus cost savings when we talk about travel and entertainment. You don't expect your sales staff to stay at the hourly rate motel because it's a little cheaper, even though it's a flea bag motel. You want a place that's respectable. However, that doesn't mean the Ritz-Carlton, that doesn't mean the Omni, that doesn't mean all of those fancy 5- and 4-star hotels. You need to decide what your corporate image, your company image is, and what's appropriate for the kinds of hotels your staff stays at, the kinds of restaurants that your staff uses for entertaining clients, what circumstances are appropriate for entertainment, what circumstances are not appropriate for entertainment. You need to have that understanding up front, because people will stretch the limit as far as they can. Business owners should pre-approve major entertainment expenses. That doesn't mean if you buy a client a hot dog or a $10 lunch that you have to run into the owner's office every time to do that. But if you know that your sales staff is going out and visiting with a group of clients and they're planning a dinner, and you may want to say, hey, look, I'm not spending $5,000 for you to take 10 people out to the finest restaurant in town and buy the best bottle of wine. And come to some agreement about what's reasonable to treat that client well without breaking the budget or going overboard. Because once the dinner is consumed, you're on the hook for it. You can't take it back. Once that $1,000 bottle of wine is consumed, you're stuck. And part of managing this whole process is to demand accurate, timely expense reports and review them. Take the time to review them and see if people are using your money wisely. If you're a business owner, that money's coming out of your pocket. If you were standing right there, would you make the same decisions? Are you comfortable with the decisions your employees are making? Are we still doing our travel and entertainment as if these are the good times when money is flowing freely, when in fact things have slowed down quite a bit? Take time to pay attention. Purchasing. Buy in reasonable quantities. If someone gives you a 15% discount to buy 2 years' worth of supplies, resist. I think we would all rather have the cash than too much inventory on hand in one form or another, or too many supplies on hand in one form or another. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. If you're a manufacturing concern, don't buy materials a week at a time. But again, don't go out and buy a lifetime supply of toilet paper or a lifetime supply of screws because someone gave you a good deal. Buy what you need for a reasonable amount of time, keeping in mind that you may want that cash for something else. Saving 15% on something you're not going to use for 4 or 5 months and not being able to make your loan payment to the bank is not a wise decision. Again, in tough times, you would rather have the cash than the lifetime supply of toilet paper. Your employees would not appreciate being paid in toilet paper. Now, what do you do if you're facing a loan delinquency? You're sitting there scratching your head saying, this payment is due, and there's just no way the cash is going to be there on that day. It's a scary feeling. But there are intelligent ways to deal with that that will help you get through it unscathed. First, if you realize that your payment is going to be more than a week late, call your loan officer immediately. Communication is key in a situation like this. Don't be afraid of the banker. Call the banker and say, hey, I have a real problem. I want to alert you to this, and I want to work with you to solve this problem. I want to get you paid, but the plain fact of the matter is, if you look at my checking account, you'll see that the money's not there. The banker, of course, would rather help you than foreclose and sell your assets at pennies on the dollar. In my capacity with the Small Business Development Center, I meet with bankers all the time. They look at my office as a source of referrals for business loans. And so they are frequently coming to visit with us and talk about loan requirements, what it takes to get a loan, how credit is extended. And they all consistently tell me that while they demand collateral, if they have to exercise their right on collateral, they probably get less than 50% of the value out of the collateral, and it's a major hassle, a major expense to liquidate that collateral and turn it back into cash. So your banker would rather work with you to create a win-win, than to be stuck with a warehouse full of inventory that you as the expert couldn't sell. You've got to take some proactive steps when you're doing this, though. You don't just call up and say, help, I can't do it. You need to walk around with realistic cash flow projections. Let's take a look at the next quarter, the next half, the next year. How am I realistically expecting my cash to flow in and out of my business? And then, based on your cash flow projections, you need to propose terms that keep your cash flow positive while actively reducing your outstanding balance with a bank. If you can demonstrate that you can keep your cash flow positive and modify the terms of your loan slightly, I can't speak on behalf of the banks because I'm not the banker, but experience and current conversation tell me they would far rather be able to champion a realistic cause than to shut you down. So, but make sure you're realistic, that you develop realistic projections. If you need help with that, that's something my office can help you do. You can call us for a 1-hour appointment, come in, there's no charge for that, and we can help you step through what it takes to come up with some fairly realistic cash projections. But make sure that when you talk, you're talking realistic. Again, don't tell the banker what he wants to hear, and then next month have this situation all over again and not be able to meet the payment, because the second or third time you do that, your credibility is out the window, and your likelihood of more dramatic action to collect that money increases greatly. So you got to be honest, and you got to keep open communication. How do you handle delinquencies with vendors? Well, the golden rule applies. How many of you as small business owners have heard yourself saying, I am not the bank? Anyone felt that way, felt like their clients were using them as the bank? You shouldn't expect your vendors to be your banker. So, one of the things you need to do, if you see that you're not going to be able to pay a vendor in time, and I'm not talking net 30 and you're going net 45, but if your terms are net 30 and realistically it's going to be net 90, pick up the telephone and call your key contact at the vendor's site, explain to them your difficulty, and ask for their cooperation. Communicate with them. You know, your sales guy will be in a position to defend you if you've communicated with him. You know, someone from payables or receivables comes down to the sales guy and starts ranting and raving, and he doesn't know what you're up to. He gets all worked up, and then you get a nasty phone call. But if you've called your point of contact at the vendor and said, hey, this is my circumstance, and this is when I know I'll be able to pay, then the people that advocate for you within that vendor company can say, yeah, I know about that. It's not a problem. They've always paid us before. They've always kept their word. We're just going to have to be a little patient. Again, that's no guarantee, but I strongly suggest that you start by being the gentleman or the lady and recognize that you would not like to be stiffed without communication. And so at least open the communication, explain what's going on. Again, communicate as soon as you see a real problem. And one of the things that always helps people is not just to say, I'm not going to be able to pay it, but when you're able to propose how and when you're able to pay. And again, make a promise you can keep. Even if it's not what the person on the other end of the phone or the other end of the conversation wants to hear, make a promise you can keep. If you keep your promise and it happens again, your vendor may be patient with you. If you don't keep your promise, you become that person who proverbially says and continually says the check is in the mail. Your credibility is gone, and you're ruining a relationship you need. One of the other things that helps, sometimes you get behind on one or two invoices that are large. Keep current on the new orders. Isolate the problem to one or two invoices. I know it goes against common accounting thinking. A lot of times when we think about paying our bills, we always think about paying the oldest first. But let me tell you, when the CEO of the company reviews his receivables aging, if he sees 20 or 30 open invoices from you, even though they're little amounts, that has a psychological impact that's very different than seeing one or two significant invoices. One looks like there's, you hit a rough spot, but there's only, you've isolated the problem. The other looks like you're just not paying your bills. So keep current on if you can't make payment on one or two of the invoices, keep current on the current stuff. It goes a long way to having that vendor be patient to allow you to catch up on the old thing that's very hard to pay. Receivables management. Anybody in the room that really enjoys collections? Anybody in the room that's had to do collections? Hardball is never fun, is it? So how do we do it? Again, the golden rule. When we talk to the people that we need to collect from, we should talk to them in the same way that we would like to be talked to. If you need to vent, go hit a punching bag. Come back when you're calm and in a good mood. Now, tell the client, hey, I really want to help you, but I'm not the bank. I don't have that much extra cash sitting around that I can float all of my clients for 90 or 120 days. I have bills to pay too. Understand the value of the client before implementing a collection strategy. There are different strategies for how you collect, and you're going to choose those strategies based on the value of the client. I had a client come in the other day and tell me that he has a problem, that he has a client that has provided him with 70 to 85% of his business over the last 10 years, and that client is in a serious state of arrearage with him. How does he manage that? Well, you're going to treat that very differently than you're going to treat someone who's had just one transaction with you, right? Now, the guy that's the sale that's maybe one transaction and you don't expect repeat business, maybe you come down on them a bit harder because that's not a relationship. That's not a dependent relationship. Your business does not depend on that one sale. But I would say at 70 to 85% of his business for 10 years, that's a dependent relationship. Playing hardball with that client not only ruins a good revenue stream, generally, and a good client, but it may put him out of business in the future when times get a little better. So you have to look at the value of the client before you implement a collection strategy. Who should do collections? By all means, do not have your sales staff be your collections agents. Do not make the salesman do the collections. It's conflicted. How can I, on one hand, go out and try and sell you more stuff if, on the other hand, I'm beating you up because you're not paying me for what I've already sold you? You can't do both. All you'll do is cause your sales staff to have a nervous breakdown. Now, the sales rep should be aware of his or her accounts that are seriously delinquent. You don't want them going out and pushing big sales or offering deep discounts if they're already in a state of arrearage. And by that I don't mean that they've missed a payment by a day or two. Again, this is net 30 and it's gone past net 45 and we're still not seeing our money. That's when the salesman should be aware of the status of the account. We don't go and say, oh, they're a day late. We don't bother people with being a day late. But when there is a significant arrearage or a significant period of time passes, we need to make the sales staff aware of how their accounts are paying. Not for them to collect again, but just so they can use some common sense in dealing with them about future sales and new sales. You don't want your sales staff to put that client into a deeper hole. The owner of the company should not be the first line of collections either. If you've ever done collections work, it's nice to be able to have someone to escalate to. Someone to say, hey, I'm your friend, I want to get this solved. I'd like to have this handled so we don't have to talk to the owner about the issue and have him get all bent out of shape. Good cop, bad cop it. Make the owner the guy that's going to come down hard and heavy if we can't work out something to solve the problem. If the owner calls, who's going to be the heavy? What's the next recourse? You've taken away a level of recourse. So. And finally, don't let it be the office girl that answers the phone and doesn't know a thing about the client relationship. You need someone who is aware of your client relationship. Not someone who's going to just be mouthy and yell at the client. Because some of these people you're going to need to have repeat business from. Even though they're in a bit of a bind with you now, it may not always be so. and you don't want to burn that bridge. So make sure that you have someone who understands the relationship, understands the nature of the client relationship, and understands how to tactfully approach that client. It's not the minimum wage person that answers the phone's job to do this and do it well. They're not equipped for it generally. Now, the owner of the company should also be aware of significant delinquencies. Again, we don't run into the owner's office every time someone misses a payment by a day. The owner has more to do than that, and we all know that. But where it goes on 2 or 3 weeks late, the owner should be aware. Owners, you should be looking at your receivables agings on a regular basis in a rough economy. If you use QuickBooks or Peachtree Accounting or some basic accounting package, it takes 30 seconds to print off an aging report if your accountant or your bookkeeper is entering the invoices properly. Go over those aging reports with your receivables staff. Go over those aging reports with your sales staff. Make sure everybody's on the same page. Basic collection strategy. You've all heard that the best defense is a good offense, right? One of the ways you avoid collection problems is by having someone very politely place a collection call to the client the day after the invoice is due. Now, this is not a beat up and harangue call. This is I was going over my books and I noticed that I hadn't received your payment yet, and you're usually so good about paying. I was wondering if that invoice got misplaced or if there was a problem. Give the client every out, but let them know that you're aware that payment is not received. Clients will try and slide them by where they can. If they don't think that you're going to let things slide by because you're catching it right away, you're not as likely to be the vendor that gets paid last on the list. So set expectations by very friendly, you must have missed this in the stack of paperwork on the desk, but I just wanted to bring to attention that you're usually so good about payment and I don't have it. Very innocuous, but send that yellow flag that hey, we've noticed. Now, if it goes on farther, let's say now it's 45 to 60 days out, whatever your tolerance is, wherever you set that, then you need to call and email both the person who the salesperson deals with, and the person who approves the purchase from the salesperson, and the payables department at that company, and say, hey, again, politely, calmly, this invoice was due on this date. We've not received payment. Can you please advise us of payment status? Again, if you feel like having the temper tantrum, go hit the punching bag, go do whatever it is you do to relieve stress, and then come back. But at this point, you still don't want to be the screaming lunatic. Now, what are the next steps? Well, the smart thing to do is to get the person that's doing the collections work in the same room with the owner of the company and the salesperson and talk it out. How do we deal with this serious arrearage? And you and your businesses all need to then set thresholds for when these meetings need to take place. What's a serious arrearage? What's the dollar amount? And what's the aging time that makes this arrearage serious and concerning to you? At that point, you need to have a strategy meeting. Sit down with the people involved so you're all on the same page. You can propose a payment plan to the client, You can ask the client to propose a payment plan to you. Hey, look, I see you're having some problems with paying your bills. We have a good relationship. I appreciate your business. I know everyone has a rough spot from time to time, but I can't be the bank. How are we going to solve this problem? How are we going to solve this problem? Make the client your ally in solving the problem. If you rant, rave, scream, kick, and do all those things, the client on the other end is not going to be your ally in solving the problem. They're going to resent that they have to pay you. One of the things that's worked for me in the past, in my own background, I was a director of finance for a franchise system. Collections from franchisees are a tightrope walk. Your business is dependent upon the success of your franchisees. They know that. As the franchisor, you're often the last person that gets paid because, well, they're not going to put me out of business. They value having my store in the count, so to speak. They value what I do to promote the brand. And you know, you're playing with a limited number of clients. You can't get them all irritated at you. So one of the things that's worked is to say, hey, look, I know you're in a bind. I see your activity reports. I know your market is down. But I can't have this balance sitting out there. At some point, the owner of the company is going to come into my office and say, what are we doing about this? We can't have that. So, if I could offer you a 25% discount to have you FedEx a check to me tonight so that I have it in my hand tomorrow morning, could you do that? It's going to cost you at least 40% in a burned relationship to send something to collections. So if you take a 25% hit on a one-time basis and you become someone's friend, that's a far better option, isn't it? Yeah. Not all clients work that way, but sometimes that's a successful approach to take. Especially if you need the cash now. Take the 25% hit rather than missing the payment to the bank. Take the 25% hit rather than missing payroll. They'll owe you a favor, you'll have cash coming in. And everybody starts with a clean slate then, so that the hole's not getting deeper. If none of these things work, management meeting with the client. The owner of the company, the sales rep, should at that point make an appointment to physically go over and visit the client and sit down and say, hey, we have a problem, how are we going to solve it? No phone tag, clear the calendar, go over and sit down. And again, if you're going to have a temper tantrum, go work out your stress somewhere else. Be level-headed and cool before you go into the meeting and through the meeting. But you can't afford to be the bank. You want to work with this client because you value and honor the relationship. That's why you're here. Now, how can you help me? How can I help you? How can we get past this? How are we going to work this out? I will accept a payment plan, but it's got to be realistic, and you got to keep your promises. The last resorts. At some point, if none of the nice tactics are working, credit hold is your option. If your client gets your product from another vendor as well, though, you're just shutting yourself out of the market. This will burn the bridge. This could ruin the relationship. And it may force the client to seek another provider of what you sell or what you offer. So know that this is something that could very well destroy that relationship. You know, there's a point where you say, well, someone that owes me $50,000 for 6 months really isn't much for a client. So you have to decide, again, at what point is that relationship no longer worth fixing? And then you can look at credit hold or prepay status. Yes, I will still service you, but your check is going to arrive on my doorstep before that product leaves my office. And again, that's probably going to burn the relationship, but at some point, you have to cut your losses. And as the absolute last resort, use a collections agency. That will really burn the bridge, and you will collect no more than 60% of what's outstanding. So you're taking a big hit, and you're burning the relationship. It's a last resort technique. But at some point, you may need to pull that trigger. Any questions on collections or payments? Yes? Yes.
Jim, would you mind repeating your question so everybody can hear?
Have I, as the client, ever tried the one-time payment plan as a solution to my vendor when I'm in arrears? And yes, I have. I've looked at them and said, you know, if you're going to collect this whole amount from me, you're going to wait for a while. But I just had this cash inflow, and I can afford to give you X dollars out of it. If that will satisfy your demand, I will FedEx it to you. And I've had that accepted. And I've also had it rejected. But at least it's showing that you're trying, that you recognize that the debt is legitimate, real, and that you are doing your best to take care of that vendor. Other questions? Yes?
Have you ever had where a client sees that 25% one-time discount as a multiple-time discount? They just see that as an overboard now that you're willing to discount?
You have
at one time.
You have to be very careful about that. You're right. That is a concern when you use that kind of a strategy. You don't want to create the impression that every time a client gets behind that you're going to give them 25% off to get out of the bind, or else they'll expect that, or they'll write a check to you for every invoice at 25% off. You're absolutely right. So you need to position this very carefully with communication. You know, I'm not going to be able to do this all the time. Simply can't. It's not fair for me or for you to expect me to be able to do this all the time. But because you are a good client and I honor our relationship and I want that relationship to continue, we still have a good business future together, I'm in a position today where I can give you a break and it looks like you need it. But I can't do it forever. So if you're going to expect this, I'm going to have to pull it off the table if you're going to expect it all the time. But if we just this one that will solve our problem and help us to move on, great, let's do it. It's all in the communication. If you don't communicate, if you just offer the break, you create the expectation that it's okay to do that frequently. So you've got to communicate very clearly that this is a one-time thing because you're my long-lost pal, and I would really hate to go through business life without you. But I'm not a bank, I'm not rich, I can't do this all the time. And the quid pro quo is always, I'm going to expect if I'm going to meet you by offering the 25% discount, that you're going to meet me by hanging up the phone, writing that check, and putting it in a FedEx envelope so it's on my desk tomorrow morning at 10. If the payment is not on my desk tomorrow morning at 10, all bets are off. The deal's off the table. Yes?
I have a situation where I do a lot of business with this person that owns a radio station.
Okay.
It's really helped out my business. and I did a job for him, and he still owes me quite a bit of money. It's a sticky situation. On the one hand, the radio station has helped me out tremendously, but this gentleman still owes me quite a bit of money.
There are a couple ways I might look at that. How much of that would you be willing to take in trade? In other words, advertising is expensive.
Right.
And one of the things that we're going to talk about in a couple minutes is how you don't cut the marketing budget back to nothing in a rough economic time. You don't cut your revenue streams.
See, at one point I was going to cut the ties
Mm-hmm.
because I was angry.
Sure.
But then when I sat down and did the math, I said, this is a valuable relationship. I really don't want to cut the ties. So I'm in a rock and a hard place.
Well, one of the things I would propose is that you see how much your real advertising need is. How much advertising can you take over this radio station that's beneficial? There's a point where, $100,000 worth of advertising is not going to generate you much more revenue than $50,000 maybe. But $25,000 is going to generate you a lot more revenue than $10,000. So you need to decide how much advertising you would really like to have on the radio. And then you offer this person to relieve so much of their debt for so much airtime.
See, I thought about that. My preference, obviously, is the money. If I can't get the money, I want it discounted so I get more airtime or more pay.
Do a balance. If they owe you a ton of money, don't take it all in free advertising. But make a proposal that makes sense for your business. Go to them and say, I know I'm going to need this much radio advertising to be successful in this market. You right now are having a hard time paying me. So we'll take part of that in trade, but I'm still going to expect a good faith gesture that you're going to give me part of that in cash as part of this deal up front.
I was ready to launch a major lawsuit.
It's been my experience that unless, and again, I don't know the exact amount, but if this entity owes you less than $20,000 or $30,000, you're going to spend more on attorneys and legal fees than you're going to collect. And people who skip out on their bills understand how much it costs to fight a bill in court, and they're going to try and hit you in that gray area where you're, excuse the expression, damned if you do, damned if you don't. But again, work proactively with them. Always start with a proactive approach. You can always play hardball as things progress. But they have something you need. Just decide how much you need of it and how much cash you need. I mean, don't take it all in trade because you need cash to pay the bills. Like I said earlier, you don't need a 2-year supply of toilet paper. You don't need a 2-year supply of radio advertising if you're having a hard time making payments. So come up with a solution that you can live with and propose it to them.
You know what? Well, move on because I know you have some other people that probably want to check. I'm glad I didn't cut the ties a couple weeks ago because it generated quite a bit of revenue from the radio. But 2 weeks ago, I was on that verge. Step it up.
Yep. Well, you always look at these things with a clear head and evaluate the relationship, evaluate what you win and lose with the strategies that you're going to play. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. Yes, sir.
You talk about if you're short cash, you talk about strategies like monthly receivables, selling receivables.
Selling receivables sounds good, but I've not seen too many people get out of their hole that way. Again, you're going to take a write down on those receivables for selling them. No one's going to give you dollar for dollar the value of your receivables. So you're probably going to lose at least 40% of that money just by selling them to a factor. That factor is not going to honor your client relationships the way you do because he or she doesn't care. They bought receivables and they're going to play hardball to collect money. So again, you're probably doing just as much damage to the client relationship as you would if you sent them out to collections. It is a last resort technique, and some factors have in their contracts ways to come back on you for what they can't collect. And they usually come back on the business at the time when the business can least afford to float the difference. So approach that strategy very carefully and with your eyes wide open. Before you enter into it, I might sit down with my CPA or my attorney and really look over that strategy, because it can backfire in a number of ways. Other questions before we move on? Oh.
What percentage of clients actually pay on time well, that you don't have problems with?
Pay on time, very few these days, as I'm gathering. I think the way you have to measure is, can you count on them for payment? Are they consistent in their payment? Maybe your terms are net 30 and they're always net 45, but they're always net 45. You know you can count on that money coming in. That's not so bad. You can live with that. You don't like it maybe because you really like people to honor your terms, but you can live with net 45 if you know it's really going to be there on the 45th day. So I would say that in tough economic times, a lot of people try and slide. But if you really do the financial analysis, you're not really gaining anything by sliding. It still has to be paid, and you're still creating new expenses while you're paying the old expenses. So slowing down the cash outflow by just being slow pay doesn't solve the root problem. It only alleviates the symptom. It makes the person holding the checkbook feel like there's more money there than there really is. But now I would say that maybe 25% of clients, if that, pay on time. Large companies are horrendous for this. You know, the bigger the company, the slower the pay these days, because they can get away with it. They know you as a small business person stand very little chance of being able to hire a lawyer that's going to go up against a Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 company and prevail. They can tie you up so many ways that, and they have lawyers on their staff, so it doesn't cost them anything. The lawyer's sitting there whether he's dealing with your situation or whether he's playing solitaire on the PC. So larger companies are very guilty of just slowing down payments. The first thing you got to look at is whether you know you're going to get paid, whether you get paid consistently. That goes a long way to being able to tolerate a little bit of delay. If you're not getting paid consistently and you're getting stretched out, then you need to take some collections actions. But again, remember I said, make a polite phone call. Oh, you must have forgot, one day after the payment's due. The squeaky wheel really does get the grease. If I'm sitting there in the payables chair and I'm saying I don't have enough money to meet all the payables today, and I say, well, I don't want to deal with not paying this person because I'm going to get a phone call every day until that's paid. Or this person over here won't notice for 2 weeks. Who am I going to pay? Who am I not going to pay? So set the expectation by making that very polite phone call as soon as the terms are exceeded. It will go a long way to getting people to comply with your terms. May not solve the problem completely, but they know that you're watching and that they're not sliding one by, that you don't really like it even though you're tolerating it. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Competing with the giants. Just a short thing here. I meet so many small business people that feel they can't compete with large companies. They feel that the deck is completely stacked against them. Now, how many of you are basketball fans? You ever notice on a lot of basketball teams, there's one guy that just doesn't have the size? Just You know, if you look at his weight and his height, he shouldn't be out there. Isn't that guy usually the guy that's most agile? He can turn on a dime, he can weave his way in and out of traffic. You know, he can be at the other end of the court while the big guy's still trying to turn around and change his momentum. That's you as small business people. You're the small, agile guy. And you need to play your business that way. You need to have an epiphany that says, I can't resist change. I should be in the forefront of intelligent change. I should change my direction while that big lunky giant's still having 5 million committees to try and figure out if that makes sense. I should be able to respond faster because I don't have such a superstructure of bureaucracy to make a decision. And you need not just to go into a complete reactive mode. A complete reactive mode doesn't solve anything. But you need to make some intelligent decisions about being willing to change when it makes sense quickly. Don't be lazy about change, and don't be afraid of change. If you're not willing to accept some risk, you don't belong in a small business. Has anyone here operated a small business in which they feel they have never experienced risk or never felt they were taking a wild chance? You take chances as part of being in business. Good business people take intelligent chances, but they take chances. Use that agility to your advantage. You don't have the inventory with 50,000 of these things to sell before you move on to the new product everybody wants. So move on to the new product. Let the big guys worry about liquidating the 50,000 or 100,000 that they're stuck with. You know, and the other thing I hear is, well, you know, you look at the mall stores, you look at the big stores, you look at the big guys. They've got all these fancy new buildings, they've got all this, they've got that. If you're a retailer, there are intelligent things you can do to keep it fresh that don't cost ridiculous amounts of money. When was the last time you rearranged your displays? You know, if a customer's always going into your retail store, and for 20 years, that same item has been sitting in the same exact spot, and it's looking a little dusty, a little beat up around the edges, how likely is that to move? All your customers are going to walk right past that item. What do grocery stores do that frustrate the crap out of you?
The first thing I thought of when you said that.
Don't they just like once a quarter just rearrange things so that you're running in the grocery store and that loaf of bread you need that was always there is now halfway across the store, and you're tripping across all kinds of things you never knew existed in the grocery store to get to that loaf of bread? You know that's not an accident. You can do that, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to rearrange things. It costs a little elbow grease. Mix the old and the new merchandise together. If all the new stuff is always in one section, your repeat customers are going to say, yeah, I know what they got. I'm going to go see what's new. They may not realize there's something that's been there for a while that they want. So make sure the old and the new stuff is mixed up throughout the retail space. And if your retail space has not been redecorated in the last 25 years, find a couple of high school kids, a couple cans of paint, and a couple paintbrushes. It doesn't cost that much to give a fresh coat of paint or do some fresh floor covering or something like that. Make the place look fresh. You don't have to tear down your building and rebuild it every 2 years like McDonald's. You can't afford to do that. But you can do things that make your place look fresh and interesting. And it's usually that we're just creatures of habit that we don't think to do that. Break out of your habit. This seems to be a common phrase these days, but think about it. If you keep on doing the same old things, why on earth would you expect different results? If you keep on doing the same old things, why would you expect the results to be any different? So if the results aren't meeting your expectations or your desires, you're going to have to make a change somewhere. Take a look at what you can change intelligently. Try something new. How many of you belong to business affinity groups? Chambers of commerce, networking groups, boards of trade? You should. And one of the things you should force those affinity groups to do is best practices. It takes maybe 15 minutes out of a meeting to go around the room and have people say, what did you try different? Did it work? Didn't it work? Did it meet your expectations? Did it exceed them? Were you disappointed? You can learn from each other's mistakes and you can learn from each other's successes. Best practices make a whole lot of sense. Marketing in tough times. Sizzle versus bacon. You're trying to sell bacon, but bacon is essentially a slab of meat with some fat on it in the refrigerator, right? How does the bacon commercial entice you? Sizzle. When someone's advertising bacon, you see that bacon in the skillet and it's bubbling and sizzling and you hear the sizzle on the microphone and the sound system. And you can imagine the smell of that bacon. And your dog is sitting next to you salivating because he's thinking, gee, I want some of that, I want some of that. It's the sizzle that sells, not the bacon. So, when you're selling something, there are features and benefits. Don't dwell so much on the feature. This remote has 4 buttons. Why do you care that it has 4 buttons? You really don't, do you? But if I tell you, this remote is handheld, very easy to fit in the palm of the hand. There's a forward button, there's a reverse button, there's a pointer button, so that when you make presentations, it's easy to use. That you care about if you're going to make presentations. Sell the benefit, not the feature. Make your salespeople practice with each other. They won't like it, but they'll do it. And they'll learn something. Advertising dollars. How many businesses have I encountered in my lifetime that when times got tough, the first thing they cut was the advertising? You've all seen that, haven't you? Why on earth do you want to cut the thing that generates revenue when you're hurting for cash? You're cutting your top line when you cut advertising. And no amount of bottom line adjustment is going to fix that. So, be smart about your advertising. Look very carefully at where your advertising dollar is going. Some of it's fluff. Some of it might not be generating revenue. Which advertising techniques drive clients to you? Which advertising techniques are nice, but they really don't generate a lot of tangible business? Cut intelligently, but don't cut the muscle. Cut the fat, not the muscle, when it comes to advertising. And while I'm on this point, be smart about your websites too. Everybody in small business thinks they need a website. And you do. You need a web presence. But you don't need, in most cases, the fanciest website that ever existed. You don't need a lot of interactivity if it's not relevant to your product or what you're trying to accomplish. Most small businesses can get by with a website that is essentially an e-brochure with contact information. If you're not going to mess around with the content on a weekly basis, if you're not going to refresh it every week, every month, make it new, make it different, make it interesting, it's not going to get repeat visits as a website. But it is still valuable to you to say, hey, you want to know about my product XYZ, or you want to see my model, whatever, or you want to... Did custom stationery, mainly wedding stationery. And they had just moved into a new location. Well, the location they moved into had a wedding or bridal dress shop on one side and a caterer on the other. How perfect is that if you're trying to sell to the wedding crowd? It's a one-stop shop for weddings. By knowing what else my client buys, I can arrange it so they trip over me while they're going to see that other vendor for something that does not compete with me. I may be able to exchange information with that person, with that other vendor who's not a competitor. We may be able to cross-pollinate and come up with some collaborative ideas that are pretty good. But it all starts with knowing what else does my customer buy, where else does my customer go, what else does my customer value. Small business is necessarily customer-centric. You can't compete in the sheer commodities world. What you offer as a small business is a higher level of personal service and personal attention. Focus on the customer. And even when the customer is wrong, the customer needs to feel satisfied. You don't have to tell them they're right if they're not, but make sure they're satisfied. The customer may not always be right, but the customer should always feel good about you. Part of marketing in tough economic times is focusing. Instead of general, throw it out in the wind and hope someone responds, the cheapest way to increase your top line is to focus on your best customers. What part of my best customer's business that I can handle am I not getting, and why? If I've got 80% of my best customer's business, why don't I have 90 or 100%? Look at your very best customers. What can you do for them? What do they need that you can provide? Talk to them. Hey, what other services could I provide for you? Take them out to lunch and pick their brains. But the easiest sale is to the person who's already sold. Right? Ask your best customers what more you can do for them, how else you can serve them, what they want from you. You want them to need you. You want your best customers to be so comfortable with you that they're scared to go to somebody else because they don't want that change. And if you're just throwing commodities at them, they're not scared to go somewhere else. This sounds terrible, but you almost want to be like a drug dealer to your customers. You want to establish a dependency because you're so good, because the thought of going somewhere else scares them. The thought of the unknown providing the service you provide or the good you provide bothers them. And you can do that. You got to know your customers. Again, the cheapest cost of sale is to the people that are already doing business with you. Who else uses products like mine? Is there a fit with new technology I haven't considered, a new market I haven't opened up that I should? Is there a traditional cousin industry that I haven't taken a look at? You know, maybe the automotive industry right now is in the tank, but maybe John Deere is just going like crazy, and a lot of the things that John Deere needs are things that are frequently supplied to the auto industry. That's an example of a cousin industry relationship. It doesn't take much to jump into that industry if you're from one to the other. Look at other similar industries and see if there is a niche in your world that's going well that you can jump into. Ask for referrals again. It costs you nothing to ask your clients for referrals. Even offer them a referral bonus. And make it a cash bonus. In tough times, in tough cash times, if you're going to give me $50, I'd rather have the $50 bill than a $50 gift certificate to a restaurant I may or may not like. So if you're going to spend the $50, give them the cash. But pay a referral bonus on when you receive payment from their referral. Make it contingent on receiving payment. The last thing I want to hit with our talk this evening is customer relations. Customer relations management. It is becoming more and more of a science in the business world. You are seeing more and more business colleges pay serious attention to customer relations management as something somewhat separate from marketing. And part of what's happening is we're talking now about assessing the value of our customer relationship. Customer metrics, actually doing not only some qualitative feel-good stuff about our customers, but actually measuring the value of our customers. One of the things we're doing is net present value of future business. Do you all understand what a net present value is? We talk about it most in finance as to say, if I'm going to have a stream of cash inflows or outflows over several periods, maybe several years, what's the value of that money today? And so the further out in the future it goes, the more it's discounted. Same thing with customer net present. Look at what you expect to generate from this customer in the way of revenues over the next month, the next quarter, the next half, the next year, up to maybe the next 3 years. Beyond 3 years, you're guessing. But use that information. You know, we talked earlier about collection strategies. I would use the net present value of future business as one criteria for what strategy I chose for dealing with the collections problem. Look at the average AR aging for a customer. What is their maintenance level? Is this a customer that's easily satisfied, or is this a customer that ties up half of my staff chasing down trivial things? What is the quality of my relationship with this customer? Do I just have a transactional relationship where I really don't know them, they really don't know me, I've got something they need, we swap and we're gone? Or am I really making this customer really a business partner and treat it like do we have a business partnership and do we treat it like a business partnership? You know, in today's business vernacular, we often talk about our suppliers and our customers as business partners. Sometimes we mean it, sometimes we just do it because it's the fashionable vernacular. But if I really view this other entity as a partner, we really collaborate beyond just swapping money for goods. Then I ought to assign some value to that. Are they a good referral source? Do they give you a good reference? Evaluate each of your clients along these criteria. On some of the qualitative items, you may want to give them a rank of 1 to 5. Ask your sales staff to look at their own book of business and apply some metrics. And start to really understand who you value and who you could live without. Focus on the ones you really value. In a tough economic time, do everything you can to take care of those people that are going to be coming out on the high end of these scales. Pamper them. What do they need? What more can I offer? Survey your top tier clients. Now that you've identified with some degree of science who your best customers are, ask them, how can we better serve you? Don't guess. Call them up and ask them. You're important to us. Your relationship is important to us. How do we treat you better? What would you like to see us do differently? Where do we exceed your expectations? Do we exceed your expectations? Where do we fall short of your expectations? Maybe we wouldn't fall short if we knew what we were falling short. We could do something simple to fix it. If we never know, we'll never fix it. Are we your single source provider for our good or service? If not, what would it take for us to gain that level of trust to get that position? I want to be your single provider for the thing that I offer. What do I have to do to earn that right? This is my last slide, or second to last slide. I'll take questions in general in just a moment. As I said, I work with the Small Business Development Center, and so I have to get a small commercial in for the Small Business Development Center. We are funded by the Small Business Administration, the Ohio Department of Development, the City of Akron, the County of Summit, some benefit also from the County of Medina. And all of that money falls into a 501c4 nonprofit that exists to serve the small business community. And our office services Summit, Medina counties. There are SBDCs in other locations in the state which service every county is covered. We work with people who have an idea and say, how do I take this idea and make it a business? We work with people that are starting a business and I'm bogged in the paperwork. I don't get the bureaucracy to get through all this. We work with existing businesses that are healthy and saying, hey, I'm established. I've got a certain level of revenue going. We're eking out a living. I want to see what it takes to grow to the next level. We work with businesses that say, help! I'm looking at my financials. I'm looking at where things are going, and I don't like what I see. Help me kind of see the forest for the trees. Give me some ideas of how I can move away from this position. And we work with people that want to find successors for their business. So we work with all stages and levels of business. We work with strategic planning, business plans, management issues, operations issues, marketing, sales, merchandising, financial analysis, product development, technology commercialization, technology licensing, intellectual property, operations, manufacturing, engineering, export, import, franchising, HR, you name it. We have an incredible network that can address just about any issue a small business can come across. And we don't charge. Now, my business cards and brochures like this are on all of your tables. This brochure talks about services we offer. Of course, these are my business cards. Feel free to take them along with you. The usual way we work, if you want to talk to me or one of our business counselors about some idea or issue you have, call us and set an appointment. There is no charge. And we will sit down and talk for about an hour, and we'll see if we can help you, and if we can, we'll set up a game plan for how that's going to work. Again, there's no charge for our services. And just in case you don't know where we're located, we are here. Nice map. We are in the Akron Global Business Accelerator, which is at 526 South Main Street. And our building does not touch Main Street. It's a building off of Main Street. Anyhow, that is what I have to share with you. I'm happy to answer your questions. Any questions? Thank you very much. I'll be around if you need to ask questions one-on-one.
And I could add something for everybody. Please fill out your evaluation form. It really helps us. And thank you very much again for Greg Retzinger, East Global. Thank you all.
Thank you.